Hello, everybody. This is Empowering Democracy, and I am joined tonight by my friend, the host of Around the World with Dee and Friends, Dee Pierce.
Mm-hmm.
Hello,
Nice.
Dee. How are you tonight?
I'm doing good. Happy to be here.
Well, thank
How
you.
are you?
I'm very happy you're here. Uh, well, I'm fine. Uh, this is not an international politics show, but I decided to drop back into domestic politics because of the rather severe situations we're having with respect to the attempt of Trump, uh, who is now going after the power to impound the spending of the federal government, which is a part of the power of the purse and is not a power the executive has under the Constitution. So we'll talk about that. And then a very good part of our time will be spent in talking about the payments crisis because uh, but people acting on behalf of the Trump administration, specifically uh, the man with the $300 billion fortune, specifically Elon Musk, there's a team of people that has taken over the payment system at the Treasury Department. So we wanted to cover that tonight in a great amount of, of, uh, of depth. But first, let us start by sharing on Facebook.
Okay, I'm sharing around.
Okay, thank you. And I will begin by going to our first piece on the impoundment problem. Hey, Steve Wolfbrand, great to see you here. Uh, and we're going to begin with the first of our articles. And that's a rather long piece. And it's called Everything About the Trump Administration's Impoundment Putsch You Are Too Afraid to Ask. And it's from the Substack. Okay, the name of it is Notes on the Crises. And it's the Substack of the MMT writer, a very noted MMT writer, very talented MMT writer by the name of Nathan Tankis. Okay, Nathan specializes in the area of the Treasury Department and the Fed, the technical aspects of what they do. He's also very knowledgeable about the macroeconomics of things. Uh, so it starts. This is a free piece of notes on the crises. Reader support, which makes my Freedom of Information project, archival research, and general writing possible, including my hashtag monetary policy 201 series. You can take out a paid subscription here, and there's a link to the subscription. please recommend an institutional subscription to your academic library or employer. And this is a newsletter. And Nathan says, I was originally planning on my next piece being along delayed analysis of the Federal Reserve's response to the 1970 Penn Central crisis using the 30,000 pages of Federal Reserve Board minutes I got through FOIA. That, of course, is a very micro analysis. However, events have overtaken me. The Trump administration's sudden and rapid rollout of spending freezes across the entire federal government requires extensive commentary. It is no exaggeration to say this is the most dramatic event in the constitutional law of fiscal policy in the United States ever. That may not sound like a five-alarm fire to you, but to me, that is enormously alarming to type out. Yet I would be surprised if any constitutional expert would seriously dispute it, outside perhaps the motivated reasoning of law professors who support what the Trump administration is doing. So what is so dramatic about this moment? Let's start with the basics. President Trump entered office at the beginning of last week. He launched a raft of executive orders attempting to reshape the federal government according to his priorities, root and branch. The Office of Management and Budget memo implementing these executive orders usefully cites the most relevant ones. I've uploaded a copy of the memo to my website for posterity, and there's a link to his website. Protecting the American people against invasion, that's January 20th, 2024. Then also reevaluating and realigning United States foreign aid, that's dated January 20th, 2025. Putting America first in international environmental agreements, that's January 20th, 2025. Unleashing American Energy, that's January 20th, 2025. Ending radical and wasteful government, DEI programs and preferencing, January 20th, 2025. Defending women from gender ideology extremism and restoring biological truth to the federal government, that's January 20th, 2025. And enforcing the Hyde Amendment, January 24th, 2025. These titles provide a good idea of what Trump's less than 2 weeks back in office have been like in the administrative state. Well, I guess today is a little more than 2 weeks, but this was written, of course, a few days back. However, the ideological flavor is in some ways a distraction from the deeper significance. The rhetorical framing of these executive orders obscure their most urgent goal, that is, taking far greater control over Congress's authority to spend, which brings us back to the OMB order. To implement these orders, each agency must complete a comprehensive analysis of all of their federal financial assistance programs to identify programs, projects, and activities that may be implicated by any of the president's executive orders. In the interim, to the extent permissible under applicable law, federal agencies must temporarily pause all activities related to obligation or disbursement of all federal financial assistance and other relevant agency activities that may be implemented by the executive orders, including but not limited to financial assistance for foreign aid, non-governmental organizations, DEI, woke gender ideology, and the Green New Deal. This temporary pause will provide the administration time to review agency programs and determine the best uses of the funding for these programs consistent with the law and the president's priorities. The temporary pause will become effective on January 28th, 2025 at 5 p.m. The emphasis is in the original. Okay, so a temporary pause. Hang on, let me see if I can make this type a little larger. A temporary pause on all disbursement of, quote, federal financial assistance, unquote, is an absolutely astounding step. Let's not forget the scale of U.S. federal funding. As the memo says, this affects appropriations, which amounted to nearly $3 trillion in the 2024 fiscal year. This is an enormous act to take with an executive order. In fact, for reasons I'll outline in this post, that is an understatement in crucial ways. Taking this kind of action with an agency guidance memo implementing executive orders is already extraordinary. But now note when the order was supposed to become effective, January 28, 2025 at 5 p.m. When was this memo issued? It is dated January 27th with the reporting indicating it reached email boxes at 5 p.m. that day. So not only did they attempt to freeze an enormous part of the federal government's budget, they tried to do so with exactly 24 hours notice. The memo is also only 2 pages long, and its language is broad, vague, and sweeping. In particular, the memo didn't list any programs it applied to, only a couple it didn't apply to, like Social Security, okay, and Medicare. Sorry, that went a little too far. It says it doesn't apply to benefits provided, quote, directly to individuals, unquote, for starters. But does that include or exclude state administered, the state state administered Medicaid or SNAP? How about student loans through student loan services? The result was wholly predictable. Payment portals across the federal government went down, from housing assistance through HUD to nonprofits that provide essential services like the Head Start program, to Medicaid portals, which went down for all 50 states on Tuesday, okay, and to Wednesday. I suppose it was a good thing I no longer had a consulting gig at the Head Start program, because if I did, I'm sure my payment would have been somehow implicated in this. Anyway, reporters are still sorting out all that was affected and what might still be affected. In those circumstances, it was not surprising that about 44 hours after the memo reached administrative agencies throughout the federal government, it was rescinded in another terse 2-sentence memo. Besides the chaos, another reason the OMB guidance was rescinded was that a D.C. court was in the process of issuing an injunction against the freeze. Why? Because the OMB guidance was wildly unconstitutional. The president doesn't have the authority to pick and choose which laws to implement. As the Constitution puts it, the president has the responsibility to, quote, faithfully execute the laws, unquote. Congress has the, quote, power of the purse, unquote. And this was the president trying to take control of the purse strings. What the OMB guidance did is known in constitutional terms as, quote, impoundment, unquote. Impoundment is only constitutional if the legislation, quote, appropriating, unquote, funds to be dispersed authorizes the president to spend less than what was appropriated. Which brings me to a new angle to a well-worn topic in this newsletter, the debt ceiling. The topic of impoundment might seem far afield from the debt ceiling, but it is not. Impoundment, in fact, plays a key analytical part of the debt ceiling conversation. In Neil Buchanan and Michael Dorf's 2012 Columbia Law Review article, quote, How to Choose the Least Unconstitutional Option, Lessons for the President and Others from the Debt Ceiling Standoff, they proposed that the debt ceiling brought forth a constitutional, quote, trilemma, quote unquote. As a 2011 Federal Reserve memo I obtained through FOIA concisely states, quote, with the federal debt ceiling binding and the Treasury running out of the additional borrowing capacity it can achieve under various accounting procedures, a technical default on Treasury securities cannot be ruled out, unquote. In other words, the debt ceiling superficially seems to create a mismatch between spending and the executive's legal authority to finance said spending. It's crucial to emphasize that this is a fairly unique feature of our constitutional system and parliamentary systems. Legislation which authorizes spending automatically authorizes financing. It is not possible to create a legal mismatch between budgetary authority and financing authority in those constitutional systems. According to Buchanan and Dorf, there is three ways to resolve this alleged, quote, trilemma, unquote. The first way is to violate the debt ceiling law and simply issue more Treasury securities. This is unconstitutional because it's unconstitutional to plainly and intentionally violate a statute passed by Congress. We'll get back to that. However, Buchanan and Dorf argue that this is the, quote, least unconstitutional option, unquote, because plainly violating a statute is a lesser offense than the other two options. The second option is obviously for the Treasury to default on its debt. I spent so much time in this newsletter focusing on default's consequences, as well as its unconstitutionality, that I feel no need to belabor the point here. And he gives a link to an earlier issue of the newsletter focusing on the consequences of default. They are, of course, extremely, extremely consequential and serious, terrible for the United States. So that's obviously the second option cannot even be contemplated. And in fact, I think it also is illegal under the Constitution. This, however, leads to the third point in the Buchanan and Dorf trilemma. This point is increasing taxes or cutting spending without the authorization of Congress. Putting aside the idea of unconstitutionally raising taxes, this point of the trilemma essentially is impoundment. Thus, truly and fully understanding the debt ceiling and its constitutional implications also involves understanding impoundment. Indeed, we may be in an impoundment trilemma, where the debt ceiling is one of the points on the triangle rather than the other way around. The possibility of impoundment being a serious solution to the debt ceiling trilemma was so unlikely to Buchanan and Dorf that they quickly disposed of it in their 70-page article. The core of their analysis is laid out in 3 paragraphs worth quoting in full. Quote, regarding the spending power, the picture is a bit more nuanced. In the early years of the Republic, Congress passed laws that authorized the president to spend, quote, up to, unquote, certain sums of money, and the president was accordingly able to carry out his constitutional duties while spending money in amounts not precisely specified by Congress. In most areas of the federal government, however, that practice has long since ended. Congress now typically specifies precise amounts of money, or in the case of so-called entitlement programs, precise formulae to determine amounts of money that the president must spend for each authorized program. When Congress appropriates the money necessary to fund the authorized programs, it effectively orders the president to spend no more and no less, than those amounts. In previous articles I've written, I talked about this as Congress mandating spending that the president must complete. Going further, it would be odd indeed if a president were to assert that he could choose to say, uh, uh, to send beneficiaries of Medicare or their medical care providers less money than they would be entitled to receive under the relevant statute. Moreover, and this is the third of the paragraphs, moreover, we need not speculate about what would happen if a president were to assert such authority. The impoundment controversy during the Nixon administration involved a direct confrontation between the executive and legislative branches, with Congress objecting to Nixon's theory of an, quote, imperial presidency, unquote, in which the president would have the power to selectively reduce certain spending programs at his discretion. The emphasis was added to the previous quote. So, continuing with the article. Note the way they ridicule, at least by the subtle standards of legal academia, the idea that a president could simply choose to send to Medicare providers less money than statutorily required. Spending less than authorized was seen as so obviously and clearly unconstitutional to them, and indeed, to the monopoly of legal experts, that it felt easy to dispose of. Predictably, the major episode that presaged the current one was when Nixon tried to claim expansive authority to impound. He claimed this right on the basis of the Constitution's executive power clause in the service of preserving fiscal integrity. As President Nixon stated at a press conference 52 years ago to the day, the constitutional right for the President of the United States to impound funds, and that is not to spend money, when the spending of money would mean either increasing prices or increasing taxes for all the people, that right is absolutely clear. Clearly, these kinds of sweeping claims did not pass the muster. When forced to try to come up with an alternative legal authority to impound, a number of statutes were invoked, but it's most notable that the Nixon administration itself also invoked the debt ceiling during its impoundment episode. Even at the time, this was seen as the administration's absolutely most plausible rationale. Yet the Nixonian approach to impoundment was widely rejected and resulted in the Impoundment Control Act of 1974. That statute established a process to freeze appropriations for certain particular specified reasons for 45 days while the president notifies Congress of his desire for the appropriations to be rescinded. If Congress does not pass a law rescinding the spending, the president is obliged to follow through on that congressionally mandated disbursement. Thus, the ICA's, quote, rescission, unquote, power is extraordinarily limited, which is likely why the Trump administration did not try to use it. It's important to underscore that impounding unconditionally mandated appropriations was already quite unconstitutional. The statute merely created a process to manage impoundment emanating from narrow, legitimate reasons. There is a reason that scholars like Buchanan and Dorff treat it as otherwise unconstitutional. For them, Congress spoke loudly and clearly in 1974, case closed. Impoundment is more unconstitutional than violating the debt ceiling. And then Nathan goes on and says, if only it were that simple. As a famous 20th century statesman might have said in this situation, quote, and how many divisions does the Constitution have? Unquote. Buchanan and Dorff's paper envisioned Congress passing the legislation clarifying that what the president is doing is unconstitutional, thus retaining tight legislative control over the power of the purse, quote unquote. This is to say the least unlikely when the president is Donald Trump and the 2025 Republican Party uh, 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 um, um, has has majorities in both the House and Senate. Without Congress or the president preventing grossly unconstitutional activities, we are left with the judiciary. Well, as of this writing, one D.C. judge issued an injunction against Trump's executive orders directing sweeping impoundments. It would be foolish to think this is the end of the road. White House President, Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt, was quick to clarify that the executive orders remain in effect. It's only the OMB guidance that has been rescinded. Meanwhile, Trump's OMB nominee, Russell Vought, is on record about his belief that the president has sweeping impoundment powers, whereas the Impoundment Control Act of 1974 is unconstitutional. Think tank he founded in 2021 and serves as president of, the Center for Renewing America, has released multiple white papers in an op-ed explicitly making the case that the expansive impoundment is constitutional, while the Impoundment Control Act of 1974 is the actual unconstitutional part of the impoundment story. Mark Paoletta, first author of those white papers in that op-ed, is now the Office of Management and Budget's General Counsel. Trump's inner circle has been talking about expansively using impoundment for a while. Jeff Stein and Jacob, it's Bogage, at the Washington Post covered their desire to pick a fight over impoundment, albeit not necessarily this fight in this fashion, in June of last year. The Trump administration looks poised to regroup and come up with a number of approaches to getting the impoundment they want. Reporting as of yesterday suggests funds are still being frozen at the National Science Foundation, for example. We're still on track for a speedy constitutional confrontation over these executive orders, OMB guidance or not. Given the precedent of the Nixon administration and immediately the bias of my research interests, I can't help but think about the possibility that they may leverage the debt ceiling to pursue impoundment. The debt ceiling is indeed back in the news, and as we speak, the Treasury is using, quote, extraordinary measures, unquote, to avoid the limit. There is also recent legal research that challenges Buchanan and Dorff's assessment that violating the debt ceiling is the, quote, least unconstitutional option. Lawrence Rosenthal argues in an article in a Specialist NYU Law Journal simply titled, quote, the debt ceiling is constitutional, unquote, that not following through on congressionally mandated spending is allowed when the debt ceiling is binding because, he argues, it has created an, quote, operational factor, unquote. As the Government Accountability Office has stated on numerous occasions, quote, programmatic delays occur when an agency is taking reasonable and necessary steps to implement a program or activity, but the obligation or expenditure of funds is unavoidably delayed, unquote. The legal significance of this that makes these spending, quote, delays, unquote, not impoundments, and not subject to the Impoundment Control Act. A significant amount of what the GAO does is make rulings on whether congressional appropriations are experiencing legal, quote, programmatic delays, unquote, or unconstitutional impoundments. Under Rosenthal's line of thinking, the debt ceiling creates a legal way to, quote, freeze, unquote, spending by making potentially trillions of dollars of spending subject to, quote, programmatic delays, unquote. Of course, Rosenthal did not claim that what the Trump administration is trying to do, pick and choose the spending it likes, is constitutional. He analogizes his, quote, solution, unquote, to a government shutdown, that is, when Congress fails to appropriate the spending needed for normal functioning of government. This would be a, quote, a programmatic delay across the board, with possibly a carve out for non-annual appropriations like Social Security and Medicare that would likely be treated as, quote, harmlessly unconstitutional by judges. But just because he is not defending the executive's authority to, quote, pick and choose, unquote, to avoid the debt ceiling, doesn't mean these arguments can't be marshaled in that direction. Imagine the havoc that could be reached if congressional Republicans decided to go back to raising the debt ceiling rather than suspending it in order to repeatedly stop the types of appropriations out of favor with the new administration. The elephant in the room of all this is that the judiciary currently appears to be the most significant constraint on the Trump administration's impoundment the Trump administration's uh, uh, um, um, impoundment maneuvers. If you do not support President Trump's agenda, this is not a comforting thought for a number of reasons, not least of which is that 3 of the 9 justices were appointed by Trump in his last term, but nevertheless, there are reasons to think this is a particular issue where the Republican appointee-dominated court might part ways with Trump. For one thing, their decisions in recent years have targeted the discretion of the administrative state, particularly over budgetary issues, as an improper delegation of Congress's power of the purse. Their zealous targeting of a lack of sufficiently tight congressional control over administrative agencies' conduct, even over the intentions of Congress itself, cuts into the opposite direction of granting the executive branch increasing discretion over spending. That could stand even if they like it better when it's in the president's direct purview. Furthermore, Chief Justice John Roberts is on record on this issue in a number of places. One of the most interesting sources is one recently unearthed by Lever News. In a cover letter to a White House memo in 1985, a then associate White House counsel wrote, quote, the attached memorandum simply outlines the requirements of the Impoundment Control Act of 1974, U.S.C. Sections 681 to 688, touches upon the unresolved Chadha issue presented by that act and attempts to dampen any hopes that inherent constitutional impoundment authority may be invoked to achieve the budget goals. As noted in the memorandum, the question of whether the president has such authority is not free from doubt, but I think it clear that he has none in normal situations, and we should discourage Chu and others from considering impoundment as a viable budget planning option. Our institutional vigilance with respect to the constitutional prerogatives of the presidency requires appropriate deference to the constitutional prerogatives of the other branches. And no area seems more clearly the province of Congress than the power of the purse. Okay, and Nathan has emphasized no area seems more clearly the province of Congress than the power of the purse. So John Roberts, he goes on to say, Nathan does, a lot has changed in 40 years. then Roberts' 1985 statement still reflects the overwhelmingly dominant legal opinion today, including from the Supreme Court itself. But those are the famous last words of a graveyard of commentators seeking to predict the outer limits of the recent Supreme Court's willingness to invent doctrine to reach a predetermined conclusion, facilitating a recently formulated agenda. In my view, the only way to truly close the door on the impoundment question in these circumstances is a Supreme Court decision which explicitly and clearly affirms that the president has an affirmative obligation to pursue any mechanism which narrows the mismatch between budgetary and financing authority. This includes accounting gimmicks they have used in the past, like warehousing, quote unquote, foreign currency reserves at the Federal Reserve, and yes, the $1 trillion platinum coin. Without having an explicit, absolute, and affirmative obligation to seek out any possible finance authority necessary to faithfully execute the laws, including wonkier options like, quote, low face value, high coupon bonds, and bonds that pay interest but have no consoles, quote unquote, for consoles. Uh, the possibility arises that the president could do the legal equivalent of, quote, taking a dive, unquote. That is, knowingly behave unconstitutionally when the debt ceiling is close to binding and a number of the, quote, conventional, unquote, extraordinary measures have been exhausted. It would still be unconstitutional, but plenty of unconstitutional things pass by without censure when objectors lack standing to sue or the courts decline to provide any relief. Quote, taking a dive, unquote, at least has enough sheen of constitutionality that it could possibly pass in the era of the Supreme Court's history. This is a legal import of my colleague Rowan Gray's argument in his fantastic paper, quote, administering money, coinage, debt crises, and the future of fiscal policy, unquote. It is not simply that the monetary power is missing from the Buchanan and Dorff trilemma, nor even that Rowan's arguments, in combination with the dramatic and flashy $1 trillion platinum coin, transforms the trilemma into a deme quadrilicta, he says. And he says, okay, I might go back to the portmanteau drawing board on that one. Yeah, I guess it's awfully hard to say demi quadrilicta, or even to understand what's meant by that. But he goes on. It's that an affirmative obligation of the executive to squeeze out every last financing authority is the only satisfactory and not wildly disruptive way out of what Buchanan and Dorff frame as an unavoidable trilemma. Hence, Rowan's provocative but quite strong argument that not only is minting a $1 trillion platinum coin legal, but the president has an outright legal obligation to, quote, mint the coin if that is truly the last financing authority left at their disposal. Here, I just want to specify, and I'll stop sharing this for a minute and go back to sharing it very quickly, that Rowan Gray was not the first person to say that the president has a legal obligation to mint the coin in the context of debt ceiling crisis. The first person to do that was myself, in a piece I originally published in a number of places, but that piece is now down in most of the places, but still survives at one of the places I placed it at. The piece is called Coin Seigniorage, the Debt Limit, and the President's Duty. And it was published on Monday, July 11th, 2011. In other words, now close to, 13 and a half years ago. And I'm just going to read the relevant paragraph here. Okay, the final paragraph of that piece from Daily Kos says, so if no action by Congress raising the debt limit is forthcoming, it will be the president's solemn duty, okay, and obligation, and I recognize and I emphasize the duty and obligation part of this, to use platinum coin seigniorage to make the money necessary to avoid default, since his failure to use the only way of continuing to spend appropriations, which he is mandated to do, would be a violation of uh, would be a violation of his oath of office. At the time, I cross-posted this piece to All Life is Problem Solving, okay, which was a blog of mine that was up and running at that time, and Fiscal Sustainability, another blog of mine that was up and running at that time. Okay, so uh, I just wanted to spend a little bit of time to take credit for being the first person to suggest that it is the obligation of the president to use the platinum coin option to resolve the trilemma involved in debt ceiling crises. So going on now, going back to sharing the piece uh, uh, by Nathan, uh, he goes on, in the meantime, we are going to be hearing a lot more about impoundment. If things keep going at this pace, it will be along for years. And of course, there are many ways to peel, okay, an onion. The debt ceiling is not the only way to try to pursue a strategy of indefinite, quote, programmatic delays, unquote. Last week, before this week's chaos emerged, I spent a significant amount of time contemplating the climate executive order targeting the Inflation Reduction Act. If Trump freezes those tax credits, do those who qualify for them have standing to sue? If they do gain standing, will the Trump administration fall back on arguments about whether the patients truly qualify for the tax credits, or even that it is legitimate for them to freeze the tax credits indefinitely while they look over the criteria and potential beneficiaries have no recourse? There's a lot of levers to pull, but the Trump administration does not seem to have the patience for aiming to win any lesser victories. Over the coming weeks, ordinary Americans are in danger of learning a lot more about the quote legal plumbing of fiscal policy, far more than they could ever have the perverse desire to know. That's not a circumstance that you want to be in. Just like you may remember, but many of you who started reading me 5 years ago just to keep up with the monetary plumbing of our economy. Ordinary Americans are now in danger of learning a lot more about the quote legal plumbing unquote of fiscal policy, far more than they could ever imagine wanting to know. When everything is going well, most people don't have to think about the plumbing going through their walls. Things aren't going well, Nathan concludes. So, Dee, what did you think of that article?
I thought it was very good, very, very, very good, educational.
Very, very good, very, very complex. That's not a criticism because the issues are complex. But I think, okay, it makes it very clear that in debt ceiling crisis, it is the legal obligation of the president, okay, to use the platinum coin. It also makes it very, very clear that we're in a constitutional crisis right now because the president is trying to grab hold of the impoundment power, uh, which uh, uh, which previous courts have decided is solely the purview of Congress, except for the exceptions outlined in the Impoundment
Mm.
uh, Control Act.
And we've talked about this before. We've brought this up. Um, I don't know how many other times, we've brought this up with this issue, and it consistently gets ignored.
Yes, it consistently gets ignored. Oh, and by the way, we should point out, to the credit, okay, of Donald Trump, he made clear before he took the presidency that he wanted the new Congress to get rid of the debt ceiling. If the debt ceiling goes, that's a solution to the trilemma as well,
Hmm.
because there's
Yes.
no debt ceiling. You just keep on issuing debt instruments. Trump did want the executive branch to have that power, and the Congress refused, okay, to give it to him. It could have taken a few hours, okay, in a single afternoon. And of course, that would have made everything much simpler from the standpoint of at least not having any debt ceiling crises anymore.
Right, but they want to do things according to their neoliberal rules that they put on themselves.
Yeah, right, but I don't think this was a neoliberal move. I don't think this rule was a neoliberal rule. It was put on the federal government actually, by President Wilson, long before the advent of neoliberalism.
Right, but I'm just saying within today's Congress, they look at things in that whole neoliberal context,
Yeah, they
and they
look at
don't
it.
want to think outside the box.
Yeah, they look at it in a neoliberal context. But I mean, what's going on here is neither of these two stupid parties wants to be the first one, to eliminate the debt ceiling. I personally think that's pure stupidity because I don't think the public gives a damn about the debt ceiling. If
No,
the debt ceiling were to go and the Republicans were to pass that, I don't think anybody would blame the Republicans if there were no more debt ceiling crises.
no,
I
they wouldn't be.
think everyone would be happy. So it's simple stupidity and cowardice, okay, for them not to have passed that, and it was simple stupidity and cowardice for the Democrats not to pass that, and to endure debt ceiling crises while they had control of Congress. It was
They like
absolutely
they
stupid.
like doing it. They like doing it. They use that, as a public, you know,
Yes,
what I'm saying, a sales point.
it's a sales point. Yeah, a stupid, inconsequential sales point. They don't need to do it.
No, they
Just,
don't.
just incredible. Anyway, going to comment. Steve Wolfbrand says, hello, everybody. Friar Steve says, hello, Doc. Hello, D. Friar Steve, thanks for following red heifer situation. 2,000 years since red heifers have been in the Holy Land. That's interesting. Why did the red heifers disappear from the Holy Land? All these policies are just reversals of the last administration's reversal of the previous administrations, have to be reversed by the next administration, by Democrats who need to win the next election overwhelmingly in 2028. Well, first they have to win the next election overwhelmingly in 2026. But I sincerely hope it's a Democratic Party that by 2026 is entirely different. Okay,
Yes.
there was a piece at Secular Talk today, by Kyle Kulinski, where uh, he makes it awfully clear that the Democrats ought to be dumping the corruption in time for 2026. And specifically, he thinks they all ought to vow not to take any contributions that are more than $1,000 from any source. Those who know about the dump of a corruption campaign that D and I were trying to get going earlier, uh, we pointed out that we thought Democrats should vow not to take any contributions above $200. So, but anyway, we're getting Kyle Kulinski joining up with us now, but his limit is $1,000. I suppose he thinks he's more practical than we. Well, maybe he doesn't even know what we suggested. Anyway, Sandy says, "Hi, Joe, D, Bonnie, and Steve." Sandy says, "Share." Thank you, Sandy. Fire Steve says, "Hey, S." Fire Steve says, "Playing off what Bernie said today, we're supposed to be a government of the people, by the people, and for the people, not a government of billionaires, by billionaires, and for billionaires." Bernie is right. Absolutely, but I don't think Bernie's the first one to say that. But still, I'm very happy he said it. I'm very happy he quoted from the Gettysburg Address, but he did get the date of the Gettysburg Address wrong. He stated it is November 3rd, 1963, which, if I remember my history, it was, I'm sorry, 1863. If I remember my history, it was July 3rd, 1863, or July 4th, 1863. It wasn't in November. I mean, the Battle of Gettysburg was over in early July. Steve Wilferman says, "Hi, Earl." And Steve Wilferman says, "GTSY." And Earl of Lurie says, "GTSY2." I'm not very good, Kay, at acronyms. What is GTSY? Anyway, Earl of Lurie says, "Where's Lana?" I don't know. I thought she would be attracted to this one. Robert Copeland says, "I know of a moron that is a member of Real Progressives and supports President Trump, okay, and Elon Musk." Who is that moron? Joe, it depends on what they want to spend the money on if they got rid of the debt ceiling. No, that view is short sighted. Oh, the moron, okay, is Rocco Million, says Robert. Well, I'm not going to say that Rocco's a moron, uh, but of course, I don't agree with him when it comes to Trump and Elon. I'm very much against them both, as you will see. But uh, it does not depend on what they want to spend uh, that money on. Okay, the debt ceiling has been used time after time after time to frustrate spending that Democrats want to do. That Democrats want to do. That was good spending. That would have been spending for the people. Okay, the debt ceiling was used by Obama as an excuse to impose austerity when he could have minted the platinum coin himself, and he had an obligation to do so. So I don't think Rocco Million's the only moron here. Anyway, uh, going further, that brings us to a second piece, and that's from the American Prospect. Okay, and D, I think it's your turn.
Okay.
Would you like me to put up the piece?
Yes. Yes, please.
Okay, I can do that. That's not a problem. Oh, by the way, this is a great piece too, and it involves an interview of Nathan Tankus, actually, by Dave Dayen. Here is the title. Please go ahead, D.
Oh, you have to put it up in the room.
Oh, okay. Sorry. I brought it up, but I didn't get it into the room. That doesn't help much.
No. Okay. Filled with unmitigated terror. A Q&A with Nathan Tankus on what it means for Elon Musk's forces to have commanded some level of control of the U.S. payment system.
Okay, this is by Dave Dayen, February 3rd,
Okay.
2025.
U.S. Department of the Treasury building in Washington. After a public outrage beat back the Office of Management and Budget's attempt to pause all federal grants and loans, I explained that the democracy crisis was in no way over, that the executive branch was still illegally withholding funds appropriated by Congress, and that this was intended to pick a fight to overturn the constitutional order and delete the legislative branch as a factor in governing.
Okay, so let us just make the obvious comment here. This is an essential thing for Trump to do on the way to his becoming a dictator. That's the significance of it. Okay, please go on.
But the crisis took a sharp turn and ramped up significantly over the weekend at the direction of an unelected South African mega billionaire. Elon Musk charges have forced their way into accessing the Treasury Department's Bureau of the Fiscal Service, the nerve center of one of the government's core functions, making payments to grantees and beneficiaries.
Okay,
According,
just a comment here before we go further. Uh, well, it's true that they forced their way, okay, in the sense that they went in there and said that they had the authority to do that. Okay, but they only forced their way because they had the consent of the new Secretary of Treasury. Okay, Secretary Besant, the
Mhm.
hedge funder, who gave them the authority. Okay, he's the head of the Treasury Department. And when they went to take control of the payment system or part of the payment system or gain access, okay, to the payment system, they came in with his authority. If they hadn't had his authority, they couldn't have gotten their access. So we have to make that clear.
Right. According to published reports, the most senior non-political Treasury official, David LeBrink, resigned after a dispute with Musk over the payment system, and Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent has given Musk's team some level of access to it.
Okay, so there it is.
Okay. A handful of nonpartisan civil servants have worked to perfect the government's payment plumbing and ensure that 1.4 billion payments a year worth about 5.5 trillion are delivered flawlessly and on time. Now Silicon Valley expats in their early 20s are poring over the code, trying to reorient it into something that can withhold payments Musk deems illegal, based on random Twitter posts.
Yes.
And that if it's the system doesn't just melt down over the removal of fail-safe elements or the imposition of errant codes.
Okay, I want to emphasize that last point because it's very important. That's if the system doesn't just melt down over the removal of fair safe elements or the imposition of errant uh, code. Now, the errant code would be code that would be written by the team that Musk, okay, had sent in. Okay, and the removal of of the fail safe elements would be there because the people that Trump sent in did not understand that system. And the reason why they might not understand that system is legacy systems of this kind that have been operating for years and years and years have been patched over so many times with different kinds of codes. I mean, everything is unstructured. It's relatively speaking spaghetti code. And in order to maintain that code, you have to have people in there who are experts in knowing that code and the peculiarities of how it's written. And there's no evidence that the Silicon Valley experts in their early 20s have that kind of expertise, especially not with code written in COBOL. which is not a common language for Silicon Valley expats, okay, to be expert in.
Right.
Okay, so this is a real problem. They could really screw up uh, the code, and millions of people would not get their Social Security payments on time, with all kinds of horrendous effects, and not just Social Security people, but of course, people dependent on grants, people dependent on contracts, people who do business with the federal government. If they screw up that system, there will be macroeconomic effects to the economy. I mean, this is a hair on fire moment.
Hmm.
Okay, keep going.
Crisis is the best word to describe it. And Nathan Tankis, author of the Notes on the Crisis blog, is the person best equipped to explain what is happening and why it's so utterly crucial. Just this morning, Tankis released a great explanation on his website of the events of this weekend and the threats of what might happen as a result. I talked to Nathan this morning about the situation. An edited transcript follows.
Okay, so we're including this article here, okay, in preference to the rather long explanation, that was given, in the newsletter by Nathan. The newsletter we previously read was on the impoundments problem, but the newsletter they're talking about here, okay, is another piece, uh, uh, which is based on the first treatment he gave of the problem with the payment system. So please go on, Dee.
David Dane, where should we even begin? Maybe let's start by giving us a sense of what the payment system does and how intricate and massive it is. Nathan Tankis, sure. I think the best place to start is actually not with the Treasury at all. If you've interacted with the banking system, which the vast majority of people have, you have this idea that your payments are being processed and there's something going on behind the scenes. If you get a Social Security check, you are not getting some government IOU object. Most likely you're getting direct deposit into your bank account. Most experts of the banking system, if they are talking about government payments, they say the Treasury sends a payment. It's debited at the Treasury account and forwarded into your bank account. Anything beyond that, even for most experts, law professors, economists, for them, that is the end of the story. But it's not. There is an even more arcane payment system. It's not actually true that the Treasury is sending a payment out of its general account. It's tr- it's true in some technical sense, but the Treasury didn't make the decision to send the Social Security check. It didn't identify who you were, didn't make sure you were deceased. It was the Social Security Administration. That brings up the obvious question: how does something go from the Social Security Administration to bring a Treasury payment? When you think through the next logical step, it's something most people think about as irrelevant. But my friends and I have thought about it as a shared project for many years. The payment plumbing behind the payment plumbing. One of the things we were very concerned about was its vulnerabilities. What's really going on is not Treasury sending out a payment. The Treasury is in this last step an intermediary for the Social Security Administration. And so, if it's merely an intermediary, if there was a desire to reduce fraud in government payments, would the Treasury Bureau of the Fiscal Service be a logical location for that? Absolutely not. You could build another system that could be a check in the validation of payments. The Bureau of the Fiscal Service plays some role in that. It has a do not pay system. Before a payment gets final validation, it gets cross-checked to a list of do not pay. There's already part of the process. All of these processes can be improved, But the issue of improper payments, we're not talking about fraudulent payments, but improper payments is about greater internal control at the agency levels. It's about doing a better job of matching bank accounts, matching death registries. This is something that the Bureau of the Fiscal Service has been focused on. They make proposals around these sorts of issues, and these proposals don't get funded. That's why they do not happen. The payment process inefficiency isn't because there's some lazy bureaucrat who won't do a thing. Their proposals do things more efficiently cost money. What we know about reducing fraud, the old saying is, you have to spend money to make money. It's the same process of spending money at the IRS, so you can do more technical audits and give a return. So we heard about how Musk's people got access to the payment system, and then later report included unnamed sources saying that they only have read-only access at the moment. What do you think they're up to? What could be done with read-only access? I wouldn't speculate about all the things you can do with read-only access. The basic fundamental issue is you read the code in order to understand it and uh, to make changes to the code. Why else are you looking at the code except for proposing changes? The top civil service professional, a man who was just named acting Treasury Secretary for a while and technically appointed by Trump for that position, said that this is too serious for me to be willing to accept and was put on paid administrative leave and then, quote, made the decision to retire, but really was forced out. That is a sign, above all signs, that this isn't a trustworthy process. If Musk managed to get the White House to personally order this person fired, the idea that, oh, Treasury Secretary Bessent would then, when it came to actual changes to the code, would suddenly stand up to the pressure from the White House and Musk is not plausible, and has yet to be produced.
I'm sorry, I went too fast.
Any evidence of its plausibility.
Right.
With the evidence we have, they are using read-only access to look at code, propose changes, and then push for those changes to be implemented. And we're still very early in that process. We don't know who else is going to be leaving this important department or who is going to be fired. This all happened on Friday. It's now Monday. This is the next business day.
Of course,
We
it's
don't,
not Tuesday.
yeah, we don't know how many times we will iterate this process with the next person saying this is irresponsible and getting pushed out. I will say, without revealing any more details, I have heard from a number of former Bureau of Fiscal Service people already since my piece has come out, and they all confirm my analysis. They say I've got the legacy IT system issues right and am right about the extreme concerns. So let's say you're right and they get full access and the ability to make changes. How granular could that get? I've seen a lot of speculation about, oh, these people have access to my social security number. He can withhold my social security payment. Are we really talking about disapproval of payments at the individual level, or would it have to be broader categories? There are no They are nowhere close to the ability to block individual payments at the Bureau of Fiscal Service level. I've seen people speculate that it's already happening, but it's very hard to see what's going on. Musk bloviates a lot, and they are concurrently infiltrating the agencies. The slow motion trench warfare is happening, and they have had access on that front, like with US aid. What happens when they get an agency to bend to their will and control an agency? They could shut off payments to that source. With legacy IT systems, it's impossible that they've gained any capabilities at least yet. Even if people are punitively complying with Deutsch and that they are not eager to say the least for this stuff to happen. I don't think worrying about individual payments is on the track for the near future. That being said, they can potentially be at the point, depending on how much more authority they get at the Bureau of the Fiscal Service, to cut off the payments of an agency. If an agency is resisting on any unclear timeline, they may be able to suffocate one agency's payments. And if that's even 1 day payments or not going out, it can be catastrophic, as we saw last week with the freeze at OMB. Right. So I was writing about that last week. That push to impound funds was based on very deliberate legal theories from the OMB director and his allies, and I was obviously meant to pick a constitutional fight that filters up to the Supreme Court. But this is something different. What do you make of that? Was the Supreme Court option just too slow for the Silicon Valley, move fast and break things mindset? I think there are a few different layers. This is clearly a Musk initiative. I'm not saying Trump is secretly against it, but I don't think it was part of the original version. It was a melding of the minds at the bromance as the bromance continues. Most experts don't care about the Bureau of Fiscal Service. If Trump even heard of the phrase, quote, Bureau of the Fiscal Service, he would immediately tune out. So sure, Musk can play with the Bureau of something or other. As for Musk's motivations, you have to remember that Musk is a co-founder of PayPal. He had a long-time focus on payment. He swung back around on payments, just announced to this Visa deal with X. He has had these weird, fake, deep thoughts about money that he said or tweeted out. I think he thinks there's an answer there. When I read his tweets, obviously there's a mixture of lying and bloviating, but he is genuinely shocked by the concept of Treasury not stopping a payment. In his mind, that's a huge risk and a problem. Also, it's the data, the information. He realizes that stuff is incredibly valuable, only as they've had this annoying back and forth that they've realized the power and possibility of this. I don't think any of them have thought about the implications. To the experts who first saw the reporting on Friday, we had the same thoughts at the same time. But if you're not one of us, I don't think Musk understands the full scope of what he's playing with. That's why in the piece I focused on the possibility of them breaking things. I think they have no idea what they're doing. They are coming across systems for the first time. They're thinking, oh, you can do that. The possibilities are exciting, but they have no vision for an endpoint to any of this. I want them out there now. It's very unclear, I think, that they got it in there. Realize, yeah, this can help with impoundment and you should be able to stop payments. Then they heard, oh, you don't stop payments at Treasury. Now they're obsessed with the idea of stopping payments.
Sorry.
It's possible that at the time of the publication of my piece, none of them had thought through the full implications. I,
Okay, now that we're here, I do want to make a little bit of a comment. Uh, okay, they were given access, okay, to the payment system by the Secretary of the Treasury, Bessent. Okay, as far as I know, I shouldn't say no. I should say, as far as I believe, they would not have had time to go through the process of getting a security clearance at the Department of the Treasury. I don't believe the Secretary of the Treasury can just automatically say, well, someone is cleared, okay, to look at the payment system. There were very few people who had access to the payment system. I may be a bit wrong about that, but I believe uh, that it was less than the number of people you could count on two hands who actually had clearance, okay, to get into the payment system, okay, to write code or to even observe uh, the data, okay, in the payment system. So certainly the law requires that people who get access to the payment system have a security clearance. And I'll bet that security clearance is one that has to be issued by the Treasury Department, okay, not by the Defense Department, but they have to go through procedures outlined by the Treasury Department itself before they get such a clearance. There couldn't have been the time to investigate these people, this small team of people ranging in age from 18 to 24, uh, to get the security clearances they would need to get access to the payment system. So, if the secretary granted them uh, access to the payment system, then the secretary was breaking the law. Not only was the secretary breaking the law, but when they accepted access and went in to look at the system, the members of that team were breaking the law. Now, of course, in making this statement, I'm assuming a number of things. And when you assume things, that makes an ass, out of you and me. So I'm not sure I want you to take this completely seriously, but I am raising questions.
Hmm.
That is to say, did they have clearances? Where did they get those clearances? And if the law specifies that you need clearances to look at the system, and somebody broke the law. And I'm
Exactly.
saying it was probably the Secretary of the Treasury himself, and probably also the member of the team, okay, of Elon Musk. So I think this is something the Department of Justice should be investigating. Okay, just my opinion, okay, at this point. And of course, the question is, will the Department of Justice, be under Pamela Bondi, will they do any such investigation?
I don't think so. She's always been an ass kisser.
She always has been, okay, an ass kisser, but in replying to some of the difficult questions asked by the Congresspeople, she was pretty forthcoming about uh, how much integrity she had and how honest and unbiased she was going to be in the position of Attorney General.
Oh, she's said crap before. When she was in Florida, she was the worst.
Yeah,
She's the reason why millions of people lost their homes.
yes, I understand that that is true. Okay, let's go on.
I think it's right to not assume perfect competency. So, from an information technology standpoint, how easily could we tip from a flawless flow of payments into something broken?
And Nathan replies,
I think the operational risk, they're so multivariate, even trying to come up with an answer of how many, it's like, where do you start? Maybe the first is introducing non-native technology. Technology goes through a rigorous process to be used by the federal government. It's checked for various safety issues. How many more years did people like Obama use Blackberries when everyone, including CEOs, were using iPhones? There's a very rigorous process for making technology safe and secure. Obviously, none of that process is happening. The organization responsible for doing that, the U.S. Digital Service, has been gutted and turned into a meme. As I discussed in the piece, there are systems that are run into parallel between older and newer versions to make sure the same answers are coming out. We're talking about systems where for years both systems have been putting out correct data but not shutting down one because of edge cases where the data could be different. Only after years of work they'll shut down the older system. When you're running old and new systems in tandem, you're incurring both costs. My central terror, although there are a million ones you can pick, is that based on Musk's history, the redundancies, which are the premise of mission critical IT systems, the premise that this must never fail, he's going to look at it and say, look at this inefficiency. A mission critical system has to be inefficient because that's how you make sure it functions all the time. The difference between 97% and 100% functioning is crucial. It may be inefficiency, but it means making sure that 88% of the federal government's payments are going out all the time reliably. One of the most interesting factors that you talked about in a piece on Friday is how this could intersect with the debt limit.
Yes, and that, of course, is the piece that we earlier read.
Yes. When the president is faced with multiple contradictory orders, he can't spend above the debt limit, but he can't stop the flow of payments. So he could sort of legally stop certain payments to keep under the ceiling limit. I don't think it was part of Trump's plan to exploit the debt limit because he wanted very seriously to abolish it last year. He sees the risk. But in this instance, it could also be an advantage. At this juncture, I worry that I was far too optimistic in my piece Friday morning. I abandoned that as an issue. We're dealing with something much more fundamental and much more dire. It seems to me there's an open question of really needing legal justifications. Maybe there's an invocation of debt ceiling rhetorically, and they're talking about debt in general. Musk wants to cut the equivalent of 25% of government spending. But taking over the payment system, this has opened the Pandora's box of focusing on the worst case scenarios.
Yes.
If you told me now that the issue would be using the debt ceiling to justify spending cuts, I would breathe such a sigh of relief. That is just a normal five-alarm fire constitutional crisis. Where I'm at right now, from the moment I read the Washington Post reporting on Friday to this moment, I have been filled with unmitigated terror. It's a major motivation why I spent 20 continuous hours writing this piece. I am filled with terror, and not because of a constitutional crisis of using the debt ceiling to unconstitutionally impound spending. Your focus more on the breaking of the payment system. A complete meltdown of the Treasury system, that's the worst case scenario of the Social Security checks not going out. I'm only concerned whether they have the idea now on where they are rooting around and it will occur to them in the next however many days to use the payment system as a trump card to whatever limited checks and balances that are left. So to me, it goes the system failure is the most. Then it goes them realizing their ability to completely paralyze resistance to themselves using this crucial payment artery. Mm.
So I want everybody to contemplate that article and to understand that Nathan is not the only one filled with unmitigated terror. Any person with any sense who knows how many people are implicated in that payment system should be filled with that kind of terror. D, any comments?
What's scary is the fact that playing around with something they don't know.
That they
And all
don't,
it,
yeah.
yeah, and all it takes is one thing to you know what I'm saying, to blow up a whole system or a whole something that was flowing the right way or flowing properly. One small error, one small stupid thing just to wreak havoc. I mean, it is scary.
Yes, it is scary
Because they don't know what they're doing.
because they don't know what they're doing, and they're doing it anyway. And the Silicon Valley people think it's good to break things because they don't like the present system. They want to break it, and they are the kind of people who don't care what the consequences are for anybody else.
No, they don't.
A lot of them are, radical types of individualists. They're libertarians in terms of their ideology, and they're just going to be careless with things that can harm other people. And so that's a reason for feel having an unmitigated sense of terror about this. Going back to the comments, Robert Copeland says, Joe, they could spend the money on tax breaks for the 1% and not for the military and not for the people. Yes. Robert Copeland says that should be for the military, and not for the people. Okay. Yeah. Farrar Steve says, I think Musk is building his own payment system and he's trying to steal codes from the government. Plus, he can look at his competitors with access. Musk, like Trump, is only looking out for himself. That's why he paid Trump $200 million for access. Yeah, he paid Trump $200 million for a lot of things. No idea if Musk can be trusted. He hates America, says Friar Steve. Sandy Day says, he seems shifty, if you ask me. He seems without any morals, if you ask me. Friar Steve says, most likely they broke the law and know they will get pardoned. I think that's true. In other words, a lot of the people who work for Trump now are sure that if they break the law in the process of working for him, that they will get pardoned and that he himself is immune from prosecution by the Supreme Court because the Supreme Court made that absolutely horrible and unmitigatedly stupid decision. Sandy says, Trump will do it. He's been stupid enough to pardon him. Well, he knows that his ability to pardon them and his willingness to pardon them is a great, great power he has in getting people to do what he wants. I mean, that was a very dangerous thing, the Supreme Court has done, because they enable followers of Trump to do lawless things and not to worry about, doing lawless things. Sandy says Trump is playing a dangerous game. He is playing, a very dangerous game. Okay, I want to get on to the next post, which was a pretty decent one by Stephanie Kelt. Okay, on her Substack. Yes, you can. On her Substack. So it's a relatively short one compared to ones we've already gone through. And the question is, will the ratings agencies react to the breakdown in governance? This is on February 3rd, 2024. It's been 3 days since the Washington Post reported that the highest ranking career official of the Treasury Department, David A. LeBrick, left the agency after a clash with allies of billionaire Elon Musk over access to sensitive payment systems. LeBrick was serving as acting Treasury Secretary while Scott Bessent, Trump's nominee for the job, was going through the confirmation process. Now Secretary. LeBrick did his best to protect the Treasury from a hostile takeover, refusing to give in to members of Musk's Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE, which she should point out here that it is not a department. It is a group of advisors, to Trump. I don't believe they're even paid advisors. It may be Musk is paying them, but the government isn't paying them because there's no budget for them, because there's no Department of Government Efficiency. It was not constituted by the Congress. Every department in the cabinet has to be constituted by the Congress. So this is a faux department who had been pressuring officials for access since the election. But after Bessent was confirmed as Treasury Secretary last Monday, the White House put LeBrick on administrative leave. There was nothing more he could do, so he announced his retirement. But Bessent was now in charge. And Bessent, it turns out, is a yes man. He handed over the keys almost immediately, as the New York Times reported on Saturday. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent gave representatives of the so-called Department of Government Efficiency, there it is, so-called, that's why they said so-called, access to the federal payment system late on Friday. According to 5 people familiar with the change, handing Elon Musk, and the team he is leading, a powerful tool to monitor and potentially limit the government spending. But not to legally limit government spending. I have to emphasize that. They may limit it by botching up the system, or they may limit it by refusing to pay some bills, but none of that's going to be legal. Going on, I thought it was a 4-alarm fire when we found out what Musk's team was trying to pull off, but it became a 5-alarm fire when we learned they had succeeded. Not sure most Americans appreciate the gravity of the situation. In fact, I suspect they don't. Here's a useful thread from Nathan Tankis. So she's going to quote Twitter thread. It drives the sum of what's at stake. In addition to privacy concerns, Musk's team now has access to some of our most sensitive data, including our social security numbers, bank details, etc. There's a real risk that a rogue group of infiltrators could gain operational control over the payment systems. What could that mean? The Washington Post explains. Typically, only a small number of career officials control Treasury's payment systems. Career officials mean civil service officials. Run by the Bureau of the Fiscal Service, the sensitive systems control the flow of more than $6 trillion annually to households, businesses, and more nationwide. Tens, if not hundreds of millions of people across the country rely on the systems which are responsible for distributing Social Security, Medicare benefits, salaries for federal personnel, payments to government contractors and grant recipients, and tax refunds, among tens of thousands of other functions. Or, as Nathan put it, oh, by the way, anyone already filed taxes and expecting a tax refund from the federal government in record time? Well, good luck. You do not want Elon Musk to have operational control over whether you, your hospital, should say this is a tweet from Nathan, who's calling himself, but Nathan Befoya Tankis. So you do not want Elon Musk to have operational control over whether you, your hospital, a road you drive on, a bus you take gets public money. That includes Social Security, even if only a quote, uh, okay, uh, moderate unquote form of impoundment gets quote legalized. The operational control uh, really matters. Under the Constitution, once Congress appropriates funding for various programs, be it Social Security, Medicaid, the Inflation Reduction Act, or Meals on Wheels, it's up to the executive branch, the U.S. Treasury, and the White House to faithfully execute the law. As I wrote for Newsweek last week, says Stephanie, no one, not Elon Musk or President Trump, has the legal authority to delay or cancel appropriations once they have been enacted into law. Any default would violate the Impoundment Control Act of 1974. But that clearly doesn't matter to President Trump and his team, who have already demonstrated a willingness to ignore the law. As evidence, look no further than the administration's attempt to claim sweeping powers to impound spending via executive orders just last week. Indeed, a willingness to violate the law appears to be a prerequisite for getting a top spot in this administration, as Senator Patty Murray highlighted in her questioning of Russ Vogt, Trump's pick to head the Office of Management and Budget during his confirmation hearing last week. She said, Mr. Vogt, your written response when pressed on this is that you will follow the advice of the incoming OMB General Counsel, Mark Paoletta, someone who has called the Impoundment Control Act, quote, a stupid law, unquote, and recently tweeted at you to, quote, impound, baby, impound, unquote. Make no mistake, there is a power grab, a coup unfolding, and we are in a constitutional crisis. With each push for greater concentration of power in the executive branch, Congress is one step closer to losing its footing as a co-equal branch of government. These are the warning from the New York Times. Okay, and she says that it's her emphasis in this quote. The system could give the Trump administration another mechanism to attempt to, and here's the emphasis, unilaterally restrict disbursement of money approved for specific purposes by Congress. End of emphasis. A push that has faced legal roadblocks. But Mr. Musk, who has been given wide latitude by President Trump to find ways to slash government spending, is recently fixated on Treasury's payment processes, criticizing the department in a social media post on Saturday for not rejecting more payments as fraudulent or improper. There is already a system in place to identify fraudulent payments before they reach the payout stage, but that won't stop Musk's team from claiming all sorts of payments are, quote, fraudulent, unquote. There's also scope for widespread abuse when it comes to deciding what's considered, quote, improper, unquote. Don't like the Inflation Reduction Act or problems that provide essential service to low-income Americans, classify them as, quote, improper, unquote, and default on those payments. Never mind that it violates the Impoundment Act. In addition, we know that Musk believes that the U.S. government is going, quote, bankrupt, unquote. Crazy. He's obsessed with the size of the national debt, and he's constantly claiming that inflation is always and only the result of excessive government spending. Now he's pledging to bring inflation down to zero by cutting $4 billion per day in federal spending. Just how far would he go if he had the ability to unilaterally default on federal obligations? So far, it appears that the Musk team can use the payment system to extract, store, and analyze data, but it doesn't have the ability to halt any payments. That's because they don't yet have, quote, operational control of the payment system. As Nathan wrote in his newsletter this morning, quote, yet, unquote, is the operative word. And this is a quote from Nathan, a long quote from Nathan. This is not the attitude of people who are trying to simply technocratically make the payment system more, quote, efficient, unquote. They have a very clear and specific agenda, which involves unilaterally cutting spending, particularly spending they perceive to be going to their ideological foes. If Musk and Trump can reach into the choke point, the Bureau of the Fiscal Service, they could possibly not need agency cooperation. They can just impound agency payments themselves. They could also stop paying federal employees they have forced on administrative leave, coercing them to resign. It's a five-alarm fire. Will the ratings agencies weigh in, as the Wall Street Journal reported on Saturday? Quote, any interruption in the operation of the payment system could result in far-reaching economic disruption. During the negotiations over raising the debt ceiling, concerns about the continued performance of the payment system are at the core of the anxiety on Wall Street and in Washington. So what happens if Doge gains operational control and decides to start picking and choosing which government commitments to honor? The WSJ asked Don Hammond, who ran Treasury's payment system in the late 1990s and early 2000s. It reported, quote, Hammond said he's particularly concerned about the risks of giving access to people who aren't federal employees, partly because of their ability to access or change the payment system, and partly because of sensitive national security payments made through the system. Quote, this is nothing like any transition, unquote, Hammond said. Quote, they're putting themselves and putting Treasury in a place where it truly doesn't have the legal authority. Uh, uh, um, uh, Alarm bells should be ringing from on high. And I can't help but wonder whether the ratings agencies, of course she's calling for them now, Fitch, Moody's, and Standard & Poor's are going to weigh in. The last time there was this much chaos and uncertainty after the January 6th insurrection and debt ceiling shenanigans, Fitch downgraded its rating on U.S. government debt from AAA to AA plus, highlighting concerns about a steady deterioration in America's standards of governance, unquote. It's hard to see how they can look through this moment. The United States isn't broke, and it isn't going broke. It issues a sovereign currency, and its payment obligations are denominated in that unit of account. That means that the federal government can never be pushed into an involuntary default on any of its commitments. It is likely that if Musk's team initiates a default, it will be a default on general spending commitments rather than payments on existing Treasury debt. But if a band of lunatics mount a successful coup and start turning off payments, then a voluntary default across a wide array of commitments is certainly possible. Musk has already identified interest expenditure as a, quote, wasteful, unquote, form of government spending that he would like Doge to cut. And even if the Treasury continues to pay interest and principal to bondholders without interruption, seizing control of the payment system and arbitrarily defaulting on other commitments would surely demonstrate a further, quote, deterioration in the standards of government. It is time to acknowledge the unprecedented breach of protocol, the brazen disregard for the rule of law, and the elevated risk of default. And that's the way Stephanie ends this. She has a footnote. She says, I'm not suggesting that a downgrade would cause investors to sour on U.S. Treasuries and force the administration to back down. It's more about acknowledging the breakdown in governance and the elevated risk of voluntary defaults across the spectrum of government obligations. I think she's right about that. But on the other hand, if there is a risk of default, an elevated risk, okay, of default, And if we see a default, at that point, it would cause investors to sour on U.S. treasuries. I think, anyway. So, okay, I think that's a great post. Okay, it makes a great point. Of course, everything is dependent, okay, on Nathan's investigations and his conclusions, but they appear to be very well placed. Okay, now let's go to this. Are there any further? Sandy Dag says Trump is playing a dangerous game. Yes, he is. Musk is messing around Treasury, and Trump is allowing this. He's NUTS! Exclamation point. And Sandy says, I could see Trump and Musk doing this. Musk has no business sticking his nose where it doesn't belong. Yes, he has no business at all. But Trump is giving him free rein to stick his nose where it doesn't belong. And it's a fiasco. It's a disaster. It's a 5 alarm fire.
Yes, because you have people, experts, that know the system inside and out. Everything is working.
Yes, and these people are getting dismissed, are being forced to retire. It's
It's absurd.
a 5 alarm fire. Sandy says Trump needs to be impeached. Yes, and Scott Bessent needs to be impeached. Almost one of his first acts as Secretary of Treasury was to break the law. Now, he can be impeached and he can be convicted. Trump can pardon him from prosecution, but Trump can't protect him from impeachment and conviction and removal from office. And that's what should be done with respect to Bessent. And that's what should be done with respect to Trump. And then, if Trump is no longer president, then other prosecutions can be proceeding against him from before the time that he was president. Maybe the cases that have been suspended can be taken up again, and Trump can be forced to pay the price, okay, of his lawlessness. Anyway, let's go on to the next piece. Time is a fleeting. I think this is well worth all the time spent, but we have to go forward. So this is a piece from Common Dreams. Okay, so it's your turn, D.
Okay.
So I put this up.
Okay. Unions sue to revoke Musk cronies access to critical payment system. Quote, it is a disgrace. It is disgraceful that the Trump administration has allowed unelected billionaires and their lackeys unfettered access to the personal and financial information of Americans. You know, it's sick. Like we said, it's madness.
It's madness. And this piece was written by Jake Johnson, February 4th, 2025. That's today.
A pair of labor unions and an advocacy group representing retirees sued the U.S. Treasury Department on Monday in an effort to halt Elon Musk's team's dangerous access to a critical government payment system, access granted by U.S. President Donald Trump's hand-picked Treasury chief. In a lawsuit filed with the U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia, the Alliance for Retired Americans, the American Federation of Government Employees, and the Service Employees International Union said they're seeking to stop the Trump Treasury Department's, quote, unlawful, ongoing, systematic, and continuous disclosure of personal and financial information to Musk and members of the so-called Department of Government Efficiency. Quote, the scale of the intrusion into individuals' privacy is massive and unprecedented. The complaints state, quote, millions of people cannot avoid engaging in financial transactions with the federal government and, therefore, cannot avoid having their sensitive personal and financial information maintained in government records. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent's decision last week to give Deutsche, quote, full, continuous, and ongoing access to that information for an unspecified period of time means that retirees, taxpayers, federal employees, companies, and other individuals from all walks of life have no assurance that their information will receive the protection that federal law affords, the lawsuit adds. The coalition urged the government to immediately enjoin the Treasury Department from, quote, continuing to permit such access, which has sparked calls for Bessent's impeachment, as observers characterize the Musk team's infiltration of key federal agencies as a coup. Quote, it is disgraceful that the Trump administration has allowed unelected billionaires and their lackeys unfettered access to the personal and financial information of Americans, AFGE National President Everett Kelly said in a statement Monday. Quote, together we can stop the violation of American citizens' privacy. Richard Fiesta, executive director of the Alliance for Retired Americans, said that, quote, we are outraged and alarmed that the Trump administration has allowed so-called Deutsche staff to violate the law and access millions of older Americans' sensitive personal and financial data. Quote, seniors are already the most vulnerable Americans to fraud and scams, with FBI data showing losses of $3.4 billion in 2023 alone. Fiesta added, quote, we urge the court to quickly act to stop this unlawful theft of our data. We are living in a nightmare created by Donald Trump and Elon Musk, and we need to wake up. The lawsuit was filed as Bessent reportedly assured Republican lawmakers behind closed doors that Musk and his cronies, quote, do not have control over the Treasury Payment System overseen by the Bureau of the Fiscal Service. But reporting out Tuesday morning suggests that's not true. According to Wired, a 25-year-old engineer named Marco Elias, who previously worked for two Elon Musk companies, has direct access to Treasury Department systems responsible for nearly all payments made by the U.S. government. Citing unnamed sources, Wired reported that Elise's privilege include the ability not just to read, but to write code on two of the most sensitive systems in the U.S. government, the Payment Automation Management and Secure Payment System at the Bureau of the Fiscal Service. Researcher Nathan Tankus wrote in his newsletter early Tuesday that, quote, we are in such a catastrophic situation, I do not have the words to describe. Quote, it is getting worse and very little is being done. Lawsuits have been launched to stop this on privacy grounds, but we need so much more. Strongly worded letters from Congress are not enough, wrote Tankus. Quote, there is a protest at the Treasury today. This is not a newsletter to tell you how to organize or engage in political action, but wherever you are, wherever your context, get involved in resisting the Trump administration's catastrophic, lawless, and destruction. And get the word out about the Trump-Musk Treasury payments crisis of 2025, which is the crisis above all the crises happening concurrently. At a press conference on Monday, Senator Elizabeth Warren said that, quote, when unelected billionaires start ransacking our government offices, this is not business as usual. Quote, we are living a nightmare created by Donald Trump and Elon Musk. And we need to wake up, Warren added. Quote, we need to use every tool we have to fight back. And in the Senate, we can start by saying no to dangerous Trump nominees like Tulsi Gabbard or Russ Vought.
Okay, I have to make a statement of opinion on that last.
I know, I was thinking the same thing.
I don't think Tulsi is a dangerous nominee.
I
I
don't either.
think she will tell the truth to Trump, and that's what Trump needs to hear more than anything else. She won't try to fool him. This guy, Russ Vought, he is dangerous. And his confirmation needs to be stopped. But we also have to recognize the fact that Congress can start standing on 2 feet and blocking the confirmation, okay, of his nominees. And that would be great. But that doesn't stop him from making appointments of acting directors, okay, to the cabinet agencies who can serve for a temporary period of time. And he can appoint horrible people, okay, as acting directors under various rules and constraints. He doesn't have, it's not completely flexibility in terms of serving, and stuff like that. But he can still get the people he wants into positions of authority for enough time to do very serious damage. The only real way to stop this kind of stuff is to impeach and convict Donald Trump and remove him from office. And since reports are quite clear that J.D. Vance is just as bad, okay, as Donald Trump, I would say there that he probably needs to be impeached and convicted also. Okay, and remember, impeachment and conviction, impeachment by the House, conviction by the Senate, are political processes. They are not legal processes going through a court of law. They're about removing people from office. The same standards do not apply, but more important standards apply, and those are related to removal from office when people are doing serious damage to the United States. So, we need to get people in as president who will no longer be doing serious damage to the United States, who won't be involved in the kinds of things that Trump and Musk have gotten involved in here. Okay, and Congress is just going to have to act, again and again and again to create some stability, because the country cannot exist with this kind of chaos. Okay, by the way, it's not going to be long before the ratings agencies do downgrade the credit rating of the United States. Now, I don't think that's really terribly important because, we can produce our own money, so we don't need their credit ratings. But still, from the standpoint of status and prestige in the international system, that's important. We don't want to have a triple C credit rating or a triple D credit rating. I mean, that's, that would only show the total disaster that Trump and his boys have gotten us into.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, this is, really ridiculous. Okay, let's see if there are any other comments. And then we'll move on to the final piece. So, Sandy says Trump needs to be impeached. Yes, this is very informative, Joe. Can't the people sue them? Sandy says 2 weeks and 1 day, Trump has screwed up everything. He needs to go. But Joe, can you send me the link to this article? To which article, Sandy? All of the articles I talked about here tonight are specified in the YouTube description for this and in the Facebook description also. So links to the articles are there. The only article that isn't up, up in the links, okay, is my own article on the coin, uh, okay, which I don't think is essential to all this. I only cited it to point out. Oh, the last one I just read, yeah, that's in the links. Okay, you can find that. It's in Common Dreams. Okay, and the link is given, okay, in the description. Okay, in other words, it should be right in the Facebook description. I think that's where you will find it. And I see you're on Facebook, so it should be easy for you to get to that. So he says, okay, thank you. And so let's get to the final article here, which is another one by Nathan, who, of course, has been doing really wonderful work. We should also all be very grateful to him and sounding the alarm on all this, doing it in a very detailed way and very definitive way. He's been doing great work here. Okay, so this one it's a relatively short one. It's day 5 of the Trump-Musk Treasury Payments Crisis of 2025. Not, quote, read only, unquote, access anymore. So, he says, if you are a current or former career Bureau of the Fiscal Service employees, especially if you're a legacy IT programmer with years of experience, especially if you are a COBOL programmer currently working on the PAM, SPS, or other adjacent team, contact me over email or over Signal linked here. My Signal username is, quote, nathantankus.01, unquote. Legal counsel sources and payments level sources at the Federal Reserve are also helpful. This is a free piece of notes on the crises. I will not be paywalling any coverage of this crisis for as long as it persists. So please take out a paid subscription to facilitate performing that public service. If you're rich, take out the uh, uh, Trump Musk Treasury Payments Crisis of 2025 Platinum tier subscription. The additional thing you get is me trying to stop the Treasury's internal payment system from melting down, or Musk taking your confidential information along with anyone else's. I'm sorry, along with everyone else's. Normally, I carefully edit and review what I write in this newsletter for structure, coherence, and other writing factors. I have time for maybe coherence. My highest priority is factual accuracy, so let's get into it. As readers are certainly aware by now, yesterday I released a bombshell article laying out the crisis that emerged on Friday with Musk and his, quote, Doge.
Joe, the article's not in the room.
Okay, thank you. I will put the article in the room. I'm getting so agitated by this that I forget things. I'm sorry. There we go. Here we go. It is in the room now. So, as readers are certainly aware by now, yesterday I released a bombshell article laying out the crisis emerged on Friday with Musk and his, quote, Doge. Doge is spelled D-O-G-E, unquote, trying to get operational access and control. The abbreviated version was in Rolling Stone an hour later. I also have done some interviews which have appeared, and one that has not in uh, um, uh, um, um, the Market Watch. I will obviously be doing a ton more interviews as well. My phone and email have been ringing off the proverbial hook for obvious reasons. Here's what has appeared so far. Okay, in the American Prospect, quote, filled with unmitigated terror, the Q&A with Nathan Tankus on what it means for Elon Musk's forces to have commandeered some level of control of the U.S. payment system, and also something from the Majority Report. Elon's coup lights 5 alarm plus fire with Nathan Tankus. I'm going to state the obvious. Until this until this coup is resolved, or it fundamentally destroys the ability for economic and social life to continue in the United States, this newsletter is now devoted to this crisis full time. Since reporting and sources which have emerged subsequently to yesterday's piece, which I discussed below, it has become clear that at least some of my worst fears are proving true. Thus, I'm officially labeling this crisis the Trump-Musk Treasury Payments Crisis of 2025. Originally, I was going to number this crisis by business days, but as Musk is proudly tweeting about Doge is working the weekends, so today is day 5 of the crisis. Since I published my article at 6 a.m. yesterday morning, a number of current and former Bureau of the Fiscal Service officials have reached out and unfortunately confirmed the accuracy of my reporting, both in my understanding of the technical situation and the extreme dangers that the access which had been reported up to that point. All thought read-only access was extraordinarily dangerous to the country. Unfortunately, my sources also tell me that the subsequent anonymous source, mainstream journalists reported who worked to downplay the situation, are not accurate. Wired beat me to the punch of reporting that a top Doge employee, 25-year-old former SpaceX employee Marco Elias, has not only read but write access to BFS servers. BFS is the Bureau of the Fiscal Service again. What can I say? I had to sleep, and my sources messaged me after I was asleep. Their article is entitled, quote, "A 25-year-old with Elon Musk ties has direct access to the federal payment system," unquote. My sources have also independently and before publication of the Wire article at 1 a.m. today confirmed their reporting that two of those sources say that Elias's privileges include the ability not just to read, but to write code on two of the most sensitive systems in the U.S. government, the Payment Automation Manager, PAM, and Secure Payment System, SPS, at the Bureau of the Fiscal Service. Okay. That means they can stop the payments because the Bureau of the Fiscal Service maintains the do not pay file housed on a top secret mainframe. These systems control on a granular level government payments that in their totality amount to more than a fifth of the U.S. economy. They could destroy the economy. Typically, those admin privileges could give someone the power to log into servers through secure shell access, navigate the entire file system, change user permissions, and delete or modify critical files. That could allow someone to bypass the security measures of and potentially cause irreversible changes to the very systems they have access to. Quote, "Technically, I don't see why this couldn't happen," unquote, a federal IT worker tells Wired in a phone call late on Monday night, referring to the possibility of a Doge employee being granted elevated access to a government server. Quote, "If you would have asked me a week ago, I'd have told you this kind of thing would never in a million years happen, but now, who the fuck knows," unquote. All of this is absolutely true according to my sources. I'll be going on. Additionally, I can exclusively report that while there was initial hesitation from, quote, IT leadership, unquote, to give them access, they relented. However, they still believe this was extremely risky, with one member of leadership saying, quote, "I've never done anything like this before," unquote. According to a source familiar with the situation, a current IT employee of the Bureau of the Fiscal Service told me, quote, "This level of unchecked access is critically dangerous to the economy and the government," unquote. When I replied, quote, "This is terrifying," unquote, to being informed that they have, quote, "right access," unquote, this source replied, quote, "Yeah, it's not good. Read privileges on its own still would have left room for catastrophe, but read and write is apocalyptic," unquote. It's as It's as of yet unclear whether anyone on the Payment Authorization Mechanism PAM system or the Secured Payment System FCS have been put on paid administrative leave, coerced into resigning, or quit in protest. All that is known, okay, is that Marco can, quote, access and query SPS, and that there was someone who gave Marco a, quote, tour, unquote, of the facilities. We do not know where they are in operationalizing any control. One senior IT source can see Marco retrieving, quote, close to 1,000 rows of data, but they can't see the content because the system is, quote, top secret, unquote, even to them. No source I have has knowledge of what Doge is doing with the data they are retrieving. One source states that IT is, quote, mostly intact, but expects that to change as the return to work mandate comes into effect and or Doge starts doing even worse things. To be clear, IT is separate from the COBOL programmers who work specifically on these legacy systems. There have certainly been some number of, quote, less than voluntary, unquote, resignations, similar to Fiscal Assistant Secretary LeBrick. The only outright firings were of the Economic Equality and Opportunity Team, which one source found, quote, insanely concerning, since that desegregation anti discrimination office has been in every federal agency since 1965. The war on, quote, DEI in the federal government is really a war to roll back desegregation and anti discrimination protections created by the Civil Rights Act and is not simply some attack on 2010's nonprofit trends that is it often portrayed as. But that's a whole other story. One source explicitly said they were only reporting to me because there was no one left in the federal government to report security breaches to. I do not wish to harm my agency in any way. I loved working here. We did some of the most important work in the country, and barely anyone knew who we were. In normal times, I would report insider threats to the appropriate security channels inside the government, but there is no one left for me to report it to. Thus, my sources have unfortunately confirmed many of my worst fears about this situation. I would also like to clarify some confusion on social media. The issue with our understanding and grasping a COBOL system is not knowing COBOL as a programming language in the abstract, nor is it, God help me, something that AI can, quote, do, unquote, because you fired one of these chatbots up and got some code that could compile when you asked me, quote, write some code, when you asked, quote, write me some COBOL code. The issue is understanding the specific physical limitations of the system, the way it interacts with the business logic of the code, and a million other contextual factors. There is specific code which tells you where to direct specific payments in specific ways and structures, and why they are structured the way they are requires deep contextual knowledge. This is, quote, business logic. The entire issue with COBOL and why it has been such a struggle to maintain it is that COBOL systems, both private and public, developed for decades with very little documentation, have a million different path to coding dependent coding choices. Mar Hicks' 2020 article in Logic Magazine, quote, Built to Last, is worth a read on this topic. This is what I meant yesterday when I referenced the 30 different COBOL systems at Treasury had developed their own, quote, dialects, unquote. And they launched Payment Application Modernization, PAM, which, among other things, unified them. What they unified was the business logic of those systems, as well as likely other factors, most notably the physical architecture of the systems they ran on. Part of me wishes they didn't modernize with PAM because those 30 different and distinct systems would have been more secure from their infiltration. PAM processed $4.7 trillion of payments in 2024. It is also true that some similar issues can emerge with other more recent programming languages and the way, quote, business logic emerges if a mission critical IT system developed using more recent programming language. But COBOL is unique. After all, it's literally, quote, common business oriented language, unquote. So while knowing the COBOL program language is better than not knowing it, it does not make that much of a difference with these young Musk programmers uh, 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 who are mucking about. Large established businesses and governments do not have a quote COBOL programmer unquote shortage. They have a quote COBOL programmer with experience in legacy business or government IT systems unquote shortage. There's a reason that uh, 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 the vast majority of legacy IT COBOL programmers had no objection to me using, quote, knowing COBOL, unquote, as a shorthand for all this. They do not think of, quote, COBOL, unquote, as just the programming language in the abstract, but all these contexts. This miscommunication and difference in mindset is why there is so much mutual misunderstanding between legacy IT programmers and the modern tech industry. The misunderstanding is primarily on the modern tech industry's part. We are in such a catastrophic situation, I do not have the words to describe. It is getting worse, and very little is being done. Lawsuits have been launched to stop this on privacy grounds, but we need so much more. Strongly worded letters from Congress are not enough. There's a protest at the Treasury today. This is not a newsletter to tell you how to organize or engage in political action. But wherever you are, whatever your context, get involved in resisting the Trump administration's catastrophic lawlessness and destruction. Get the word out about the Trump-Musk Treasury Payments crisis of 2025, which is the crisis above all the crises happening concurrently. I wish my newsletter's name were a little less literally true right now. The name is Notes on the Crises, of course. So, that is the final piece for tonight. I hope that we have made our points. People have been calling it, okay, a 5-alarm fire. It's more than a 5-alarm fire. It's a catastrophic disaster waiting to happen. It would dwarf the fire disaster they just had in California. I mean, do you realize what will happen if millions and millions of people, are not paid, suddenly don't have any money?
It's crazy. Absurdity for no reason.
I think the one consolation is that Trump would be impeached and convicted in an instant, and Musk would be thrown out in the same instant. You can't impeach and convict Elon Musk because he's not really a government official.
No.
Say now he's a government employee. Trump just classified him as a special employee, okay, of the government.
A non-paid employee.
Oh, so he's a non-paid employee. So the question is, is that even legal?
Right.
In what sense is a non-paid employee an employee? I don't know. Maybe they have a special category for that, but that is really in itself disgusting. Because who can afford to be a non-paid paid employee? I mean, only millionaires. It's a discriminatory category.
Yeah, it's sick. It really is. The whole thing is just, it's, like we said, it's madness.
Yes. The whole thing is madness. The whole thing is sick. I mean, this is really a hair on fire crisis.
It is.
So I hope your hair is on fire, same as mine. Okay, we do have 33 people here. This is good. But we really needed the kind of audience we were getting a few months back, when sometimes we got as high as 125 or 130. And we need even more.
Yes.
People should be looking at this kind of thing, as well as the international relations stuff that I'm doing. Well, okay, I don't know what I'm going to do on Thursday, or what Dee has planned for tomorrow night. But I think we've got to follow this crisis, and I'll be following it on Thursday, okay, as well. Of course, I'm following international relations crises also because uh, those are still very, very serious.
Hmm.
But even when it says, is it a reform or a deform government? It's a deformed government. Sandy says, this is a fine mess. Trump has gotten everyone into can't Musk be arrested for espionage or something else?
Creating chaos
Oh, can
and
he be prosecuted under the Espionage Act?
Mhm.
Yeah, what about that? I mean, they're prosecuting people who are doing services for the United States under the Espionage Act. I mean, certainly they can prosecute someone who's about to destroy the payment system under the goddamn Espionage Act.
Well, this is all part of that whole project 2025. It's just in the beginning, just to do so many things at once that create madness, that create like chaos, and the public is all in this chaos mode.
Okay, but I have to be fair to Project 2025. I don't think they wrote anything about destroying the federal payment system. Of course, I'm not sure. They might have done something that implied that because Project 2025 was pretty crazy.
It is crazy, and they're wreaking so much havoc, whether it be overseas, here. It's just everything's just shooting out at people all at once.
Yes. Okay, well, it's 11:30. So I think we've gone for about 2.5 hours now. So I think that's probably enough time for tonight. We'll be watching this very closely. I know Dee will be on tomorrow night. We'll be in communication about what she's covering tomorrow night. And if there are any more crises that are going on, uh, well, will you be willing to cover them on your show, Dee?
Yes, yes, we'll cover. Yeah, because I'll do some foreign policy and then stuff here too. You could bring that up too.
Okay. Okay. So we'll see if there are any other things that are uh, just as important as what we went over tonight. And then on Thursday, I will continue to follow this as well. Perhaps tomorrow morning I'll find the time to shave.
It's crazy.
Okay. Sandy Deck said, I wonder how all the people who voted for Trump feel about him now. Uh, okay, there was a recent poll uh, done by CNN that specifically asked them about uh, how they felt about the, I guess it was about his stopping spending, things like that, that part of the problem. They hadn't gotten to polling about the payment system yet, but that showed that his approval rating had gone down to 38%, and his disapproval rating was at 51%. So he was negative by 13%. But I don't think the polling on this has even begun to start. And people don't have an understanding of what's going on with the payment system yet. They don't know that their Social Security checks are threatened.
Now, and see
Okay,
these people.
okay. I don't know if I'm correct in saying that. Okay, I don't know. It's because I don't know what kinds of changes this guy Marco is making to the payment system and what their consequences are going to be. But what I do know is the current system is delivering Social Security payments on time, reliably, month after month, month after month, no hitches, no problems, as regular as clockwork. And I know this guy has the capability to disturb that. And as a Social Security recipient, I am terribly, terribly disturbed about that. And I'm sure all other Social Security recipients, if they knew about it, would be disturbed about that. Very disturbed, very insecure to think that their primary source of income is currently jeopardized by some 25-year-old techie from Silicon Valley that nobody knows anything about, who's probably a libertarian and an ideologue. God.
Right. Well, what they did too was, see, they really don't know. The media doesn't know, but they're saying so far, like we're saying, they can't put their hands on, the Social Security or any other retirement stuff, but they're saying that it's all safe, that they don't have access to that. But they've got these, like you said, these libertarian geeks in there, so you don't know.
Okay, well, I don't know, whether Marco is a libertarian. So, I'm not trying to smear him. I'm simply raising the possibility. But even if he is a libertarian, I don't know whether he's against Social Security payments for people or whatever. What I do know is that he has the capability to muck around in the code now, not just to
Yeah.
read it or to observe it or to learn it, but to change it. That's what the wire reporting said. If that
Hmm.
reporting is correct, then we have a capability on our hands to interrupt Social Security payments, okay, to Americans and to claim it is an accident. And to do that right now, this month, to interrupt the schedule of Social Security payments.
So people won't be able to make home payments or
They won't be able to make rent payments. They won't be able to buy food.
right.
I mean, if this happens, it's going to get people into the streets, and
Oh,
not
definitely.
just into the streets. The people who go into the streets are going to be in a foul mood,
Hmm.
Watch
and the
out.
whole situation is going to blow up. Michael Kenyon says, I'm a retired Canadian and my CPP, same as your Social Security, is important to me. I wonder if the conservatives get in there here, they might have a similar plan. I don't know. It seems to me that you Canadians are a lot more sane when it comes to social safety nets. Even your conservatives up in Canada, okay, are more sane. I don't know how much the atmosphere of Silicon Valley has permeated, but Canada, you know much more about that, than I, Michael. I'm certain, though, that your version, okay, of Medicare is much more highly respected than our version of Medicare is here. When I say highly respected, I mean highly respected among the general population, whereas in this country, some of the younger people uh, don't feel warm and fuzzy about the Medicare program, especially among the Silicon Valley people, for some reason.
Yeah, just cold-hearted people. It's like they have no heart.
Well, I know they have no heart, and their moral sense is greatly distorted.
Definitely. Lost humanity.
Bonnie has given me a thumbs up. She's sitting on the couch. She's giving me a thumbs up.
Both of you worked really hard, and I appreciate it. I really do.
Well, it's important to get this out because, like I said, the media, what people are hearing, they're saying, so far, these Social Security and this, payments are going out. They don't have access to it. But that's what they're saying, probably to keep people calm.
Yes, but they do have access to it. Wired reported that they have access to it, and Nathan confirmed it through his
Mm-hmm.
contacts. It's important that Nathan confirmed it. And Sandy says, I love Bonnie. Thank you, Sandy. I love Bonnie too. And Evelyn says, the chaos may only be visited upon some SS recipients based on a biased selective process. Yes, it may only be visited on the opponents of Donald Trump. It may only be visited on the opponents of the Republican Party. I mean, this is a disaster for our political system. I mean, this kind of thing is, well, I'm not even going to say what it is more. I don't want to contribute to wild emotions about this. Let me just say that the possible extremism of the reactions to this are frightening.
Mm-hmm.
They could land us in a place that nobody wants to see, except perhaps the anarchists among us. Only people with money to spare, like all private forms of medical care, ours is a national health care from cradle to grave. I know you have a Medicare for all, what we call a Medicare for all system, and you have had it since the 1970s, and I have envied you guys since the 1970s.
Mhm.
And you say you have some extra medical dental benefits for seniors. Yes, I know that. You will never win a Canadian election campaigning on an American style healthcare. I know that too. That's one reason why I say you are much more sane than we are here. But I have to give ourselves credit from the following point of view. Survey after survey, the survey has shown that in the neighborhood of 2/3 of the people of the United States want a Medicare for all program. We haven't gotten one because the donors don't want it. Corruption of our political system that we don't have it, but our people want it. Even when it says, or based on immigrant status or where they live or whom they love for that matter. Oh, yes, Evelina, all of that. All of that. All of it. I mean, this is really. Okay. We've been frightened enough for tonight.
Yes, it's going to be a long month.
Okay, let us all go to sleep and sleep well. Okay, and try to remember, if we're going to get through this, we have to come together.
Yes, we do.
All Americans have to come together, and we have to oppose this. As strongly as we've opposed anything in our lives, we have to cause this regime to back up and either get sane or resign, because we can't live with a regime introducing this kind of chaos. Sandy says it's terrifying and terrible. Friar Steve says good night to all. Sandy says good night, Steve. Yeah, good night, Steve.
Good night.
Good night, Bonnie.
Good night.
Good night, Dee.
Good night, Joe. I'll be talking to you tomorrow.
Okay, thank you, Dee. See you tomorrow. And good night, everybody.